welcome to the Fargo Air Museum's Quarterly History Night. My name is Ryan Thayer. I'm the Executive Director here at the Fargo Air Museum. And I wanted to give you just a few updates on the museum, a little bit about our mission and some upcoming events, and then I will kick it off to Max to do an items from archives, and we'll get into our program. First of all, our mission here at the museum is to promote aviation through preservation, restoration, and education. And those are our three pillars of success here at the Air Museum to contribute back to our community. To start with education, we have 3 monthly education camps here at the museum for kids from 6 years old all the way up to 18 years old. We have just launched a new week-long camp happening the first week of August, where kids can come in for a solid week and basically take our entire curriculum and get through it all in 1 week. So very exciting camp coming up. We also have Karina, our education coordinator. She's hard at work building out our very first traveling education camps. So we will be in September going out to rural schools and teaching STEM and STEAM education in rural schools that have maybe lesser budgets than for local Fargo Moorhead schools. So we're very excited for that as well. We also do these history nights over at some assisted living as well as part of our traveling history night. So education is a very big part of what we do here at the museum, as well as having our flight simulator lab and our drone cage for kids and adults of all ages to experience flight. Moving on, preservation. We really support our veterans. May I get a show of hands of veterans in the building today? Let's give everyone a big round of applause. Thank you so much for your service. We greatly appreciate it. So we do host a monthly Veterans Coffee Hour where we provide free coffee and donuts to our veterans, give you a forum to hang out, tell stories, and really just kind of connect with the community. So keep an eye on our website and Facebook for those dates. We also do every other year host our Vietnam Memorial Week, which is a really big deal to celebrate our Vietnam veterans. We've also launched new programs with military birthdays. We celebrate each branch of the military's birthday here at the Air Museum, have a special exhibit for them, which is really fun and really exciting to do as well. And we partner with other companies and universities in the area, like our partnership with NDSU. Thank you, Max, for your work on that. But we have partnered with NDSU to digitize all of our collections and all of our archives. So everything at the museum one day will be accessible online, so you can research, learn more about it, see pictures, to really share all of our history and amazing community here in Fargo with the world. And then last but not least, restoration. So we do want to keep history alive, restore history. So we do have a couple projects over in the second hangar that we're currently working on restoring. One is a BT-13 Warbird, and the second one is a Stinson Gullwing. So if anyone is interested in helping out restore aircraft, you have A&P experience, we'd love to chat because we'd like to get those 2 aircraft airworthy. So again, we're continually looking for ways to support our community, and we would not be in existence if it wasn't for you guys supporting us, for our sponsors, for our donors, for our board of directors, and the great community of Fargo Moorhead. You're all very supportive, so again, a round of applause for everyone here and for our community and everyone that's helped the museum thus far. Well, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Max Saban. He is our collections manager, and he will be doing a few items from our archives. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your evening. There are refreshments and snacks over there, so feel free to grab them. They are free. Donations are appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ryan. Hello, everyone. My name is Max Saban, and I am the collections manager here at the Fargo Air Museum. For those of you that are unaware, every week we put out an episode called Items from the Archives, where myself and Isabella, we will go into the collections room that we have off-site here at the Fargo Air Museum and find an artifact that we don't have on display. Sometimes these are artifacts that have been tucked away for a while or were just actually donated to the museum. That is this first artifact that we have. This is a World War II era uniform that belonged to a Botno, North Dakota native named Fred Clark, who served with the United States Army's 104th Infantry Division during the liberation of Germany in 1945. It might be hard for you guys to see in the back there, but he was awarded 2 Purple Hearts and 2 Bronze Stars with Valor for actions that he did during the final months of the fighting in World War II. So we'll let you guys get up close and see these uniforms before the night is over. Our second artifact, as you might imagine, finding World War II artifacts in North Dakota is a little tough, but thank you to our friends at Bonanzaville who loaned us this incredibly rare M42 German helmet. You might see that it has tan camouflage. Unfortunately, we didn't have access to one that was captured in Germany. This one was actually captured in North Africa in 1943. And you can tell by the decal up on the top there that it was Luftwaffe issue, which is the Germans' version of the Air Force. So yeah, both these artifacts will be available for you guys to take a look at up close and take pictures of, do whatever. But yeah, without further ado, I will pass it off to Walt to give us, the presentation.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, I'm supposed to tell you some stories about my life with emphasis on my childhood during the Second World War, and then my 4-year tour in the Air Force, and some general stuff about my aviation adventures and misadventures. So, where do you start? Well, where does a life start? There's a lot of controversy about that. Did it start at conception? Did it start at birth? Some people claim that life starts when the kids leave home and the dog dies.
Yeah.
So, but I'm going to stay out of the political or religious controversies about that, and just kind of talk a little about how life gets started. I want to talk not just about my life, but some thoughts I've had about life in general. And the way the chemical process at least starts is kind of like this. We have the ovum here and the sperm. The ovum always carries this X thing around, and the sperm can carry either a Y, like it does here, which it did for me, or it can carry an X. In this case, it would result in a boy, the Y and the X. If this guy has an X, then you get a girl. And so, then they get together, okay, and then you get a baby. But what I've always found that what happens after these join together, I've always found that a really amazing thing, because the ovum is a single cell. It's the biggest cell. You can, if you have good eyesight, you can see it with your eyes, with your bare eyes. It's about 1/10 of a millimeter. The sperm is significantly smaller, and you need a microscope for that. But it's a single cell, and then once they join, it splits apart. And what I looked in the internet, and apparently it takes a day or two for that to happen. It starts kind of slow, and then it splits again. So you start with 1, and then you have 2, then you have 4, and then you have 8. It's a geometric progression that once it gets going, it grows very rapidly. But okay, then you have all these cells, and I guess, I don't know, the biologists, I guess, understand this. But I'm just amazed at what happens, because then this cell, there are these spirally things inside there, and they somehow tell the cells, well, you're going to be a bone cell, you're going to be a brain cell, you're going to be a skin cell, you're going to be a blood cell. And how all these cells develop from this one single cell has always really amazed me. So when the child is born, there are about 2 or 3 billion cells in the body. And how fast do these cells grow then? Well, it takes 9 months from conception to birth. And in 9 months, there are about 23 million seconds. So if you do the division from 2 or 3 billion cells in 23 million seconds, you get about 5 to 10,000 cells per second on average. It starts off a lot slower than that, but on average it's 5 to 10,000 cells per second growing during those 9 months, and it just has really always amazed me. And that they, okay, so then there's a cell for an artery. Okay, so then you have all these artery cells. Well, they have to form a tube. They have to form an artery. And the artery have to connect themselves together all through the body. And I don't know, I just stand in wonder and in awe how all that happens. Well, it happened for me. I don't remember some of the early things. I certainly don't remember my conception, I'm happy to report. And I don't remember my birth. But if I did remember my birth, what would it be like? It would be kind of like going through a tube or a tunnel. And when you get to the end of the tunnel, there's a bright light, which sounds vaguely familiar. Anyway, then when I was only a few months old, I got the runnies so bad that I was, after a while, nothing but skin and bones, and my mother thought she was going to lose me. And then a nurse told her what she should do is take the egg white, beat it into a foam, and feed that to me. And she did that, and by golly, it worked. And so then I did have a future after that. And let's see. And there I am, a few months old. And when I was 10 months, I was born in Brooklyn, New York. I think has that been made part of the United States? I think so. When I was 10 months old, this was during the Depression. I was born in 1933. And then in 1934, my parents thought they would go back to, they had come from Germany. They'd been over here about 5 years. My brother and I were born here. And so they thought they might have a better chance in Germany with jobs and stuff. So they went back. When I was 10 months old, they went back to Germany, and this was the boat that was a German passenger liner, the Europa, it was called, that's German for Europe. And we wound up then in Germany, and this is Bremen is a medium-sized city over there, and on the outskirts of Bremen there was a little farming village that was it wasn't very compact. It was strung out along a road that was a couple miles long, called Lesenbroek, and that's shown in here's Bremen. There's a river, this is the river Weser, that flowed through there and then flowed up to the North Sea. And one of the tributaries was this river, which was called the Lesum. And my aunt had a house there, and we lived with her for until I was about 6 years old. Right about in this, does that show on there? Yeah, right about in this area here, which in the next picture is shown right where that yellow dot is. And this thing that you see here, which might look like a bridge, wasn't really a bridge. It's a dam that was not there when I was a kid. And the land around here is just a few feet above sea level, and the tides came in and out on these rivers. They were tidal rivers, so sometimes the current would flow in this direction, and then when the tide came in, the current would flow in this direction, and the river got a lot higher. So they built this dam, and here you can see there's a lock. So now this part of the river stays at a constant level now. This part still has the tides going in and out. So if boats want to go there, they have to come up here, go through the lock, or the other way around. And this slide I'm going to go back to after a little while. The house that we lived in is this. It's a house that was built in 17 something, so it's a fairly old house. Straw roof. The straw is about a foot thick or so. And this big door, this was a farmhouse. This big door, when you opened it all the way up and took this log out of here, you could drive your horse and wagon into the house. And they had animals in here too, horses, cows. We didn't have those when we lived there. But we had chickens. This was a chicken coop, and sometimes we had ducks. Two chimneys here. I've always wondered why these houses didn't burn down more, because this is very flammable stuff. But they didn't do that very often. This is the inside. This particular house, my uncle, who died before I was born, he had collected some historic items from that area and put them up here, like plates and these spinning wheel and an old baby crib and a number of other things. And on Sundays, people would do an outing and come out to Lezenbroek, and some of them would stop by there, and my mother or my aunt would guide them through the house and explain some of the historical items there. This was a big place. It went quite a ways back in this direction. In this direction. And that's where you would bring if you had a horse and wagon in the old days, you would come in there and bring it there. This is one of the rooms, a bedroom. This was where my mother and us kids lived. This was the living room, and then you go in there and turn right, there's another door, go to the bedroom. This ladder in 2 stages went up to the attic. It went up to here, and then over here was another ladder. But we were forbidden to go up there because more over in this direction there were some missing and rotten boards, and my mother was afraid we would maybe step on them and fall through and really hurt ourselves. But like kids will do, I often started climbing up here, but when I got to this step and to this step, I kind of hit a psychological barrier that I was not able to penetrate. This is how the place looks today, and if we notice that the big door is gone, and if we go back, this was big beams, wooden beams with bricks in between, but the people who live there now have totally remodeled the thing. There's no more chicken coop here. There's a couple of additional rooms here. The big door is gone. There's a window there instead, and a small door here. Notice another thing. This is a dike to keep the river from coming in. And you can see it's about at the same level as the base of the house. When I was about 5 years old, they raised the dike, and you can see that it's about 3 or 4 foot higher here. They had they put some railroad tracks there, and they had this tiny locomotive that would pull cars filled with rocks and clay and raise the dam up several feet. Let's see, what do we have next? Oh, there's me when I was about 3 or 4. And this is my wife when she was about 2 or 3. Now, when I was 6 years old, that was in 1937, the war started, and we were told, yeah, Poland attacked Germany, so we have to defend ourselves, and yeah, right. But everybody believed that, and Adolf was really adored by most Germans. And of course, Poland didn't stand much of a chance against Germany. At the same time, a lot of people don't realize this, but at the same time that Germany attacked from the west, the Soviet Union attacked from the east and took about, I think it's about 1/3 of the eastern part of Poland. Yeah, that kind of got buried. England and France were allies of Poland, and so they declared war on Germany, and that's how the Second World War got started, by Germany invading Poland. That was in '39. At the time, I had started school, first grade, and then the next year I was in second grade, and then Germany and England started bombing each other. The British bombers only came over at night because they figured, why would we go there in the daytime? We're going to get shot down, right? So they came over at night, and if I remember right, it was probably maybe once a week or so. But if we go back to this one. Here's Bremen down here, and Lesenbroek, as it was called, was strung out along this road from here out to here. And they bombed mostly in, well, they didn't bomb out here at all. They just bombed in Bremen. And my aunt was really interested in that, and I used to go outside during these night raids, and we went out with her, and we would see the searchlights going all over the sky. One of the searchlights was located right in this area here, and there were about 8 or 10 German soldiers that were stationed there. And we used to go visit them. But then, and sometimes we would see tracers from the anti-aircraft guns going up, and apparently they could fire 5 in a row. And so we would see these 5 tracers going up in the sky until they exploded. And then we could hear in the river here, of course when they explode up there, there's shrapnel going all over the place, and we could hear the shrapnel falling into the river, go plink, plink, plink. And my aunt mentioned that to my mother, and my mother said, yeah, one of these days it's going to go plink on your head. And then my aunt said, oh, So after that we didn't go out anymore at night. But whenever there was a night raid, and we were up for several hours during the night, and so there was no school the next day, because they figured the kids would all fall asleep at their desk. So after a while then, my aunt said, well, I've had enough of this, I'm going to get out of here. And she moved from Bremen, she moved to the Harz Mountains, which is this dark area that you can see here. And the next slide shows, this is the Hartz Mountains right here. And then she found a place, an apartment to rent there, and then she wrote to my mother and said, hey, you know, it's getting pretty dangerous up there, why don't you come to the Hartz Mountains also? So we did, and I remember quite a bit about that part of my life. I was must have been about 7 then, but I do not remember the train ride from Bremen to the Hartz Mountains. I don't remember anything about that. I don't know why that is. But anyway, the little village that we moved to is right here. It's called Stolberg. And there's a bigger town here called Nordhausen that's going to get into my story here in a little bit. So here's Stolberg, and then the next slide, here's Nordhausen again. It's zooming in here closer. And here's Stolberg, which was built in these 3 valleys. This valley, and this valley. The streets going in there. Then the next slide shows there were 3 main streets. This is the center of the town, and there was this street, and this street. We lived on this street about here where this blue thing is. And the next one is a close-up of this area here. And we lived about here. This is the school that I attended, the elementary school that I attended. And here is a tower which you'll see a close-up and a video of in a little while. And then we have an overview from one of the mountains looking at the town. This was the street that we lived on, but quite a ways up the street here. And this is one of the other 3, and the final 3 goes down this way. There's a church here. This was a palace, and a nobleman lived there. I suppose he would be maybe the equal of an earl or something like that. And he lived there with his wife, and he had 2 kids, a boy and a girl that were my age. He sent them to the public school. He didn't have private instruction for them. And his daughter was in my class. Here is that street again. The school is over here, and that tower that I'm going to talk about that played into the bombing episode is right here. This is the house that we had an apartment in. We had a living room, a bedroom, and a tiny kitchen. And let's see, I think the next, yeah, this is a close-up of the house. This was our bedroom, and the living room windows were over here. These dormers were not there yet when we lived there. They were built, they did a lot of renovation on all the houses in Stolberg. And really made the town look really nice after the reunification, really. Okay, we're going to look at the inside of this church. It was really a nice church. This is the organ, and here's a blow-up. It was a magnificent organ, very powerful organ. As you can see, it's quite ornate. And then looking at this palace, the next picture is in the courtyard of that palace. This is my family, my wife and son and granddaughter, my son's wife. And it has 4 levels. They didn't have elevators in the 15th century when this was built. So they had stairways, and the next The next slide is a stairway. That's my son and grandson. Yeah, and there's a mural on the wall there, which shows an unusual aspect of an angel. Okay, they had weird people in those days too, what can I say? That's my mom and dad. My father was in the German army. He was drafted right at the beginning of the army, but he was too old to go to the front, so he was, let me see if we go to the slide showing Germany. He was in an artillery testing range somewhere in this area here, and he was there for the whole war. Okay, then here is the tower, and this was built, in the old days this town had a wall around it to protect it from robbers or whatever, and this tower was part of it. The walls are about a yard thick, and the streets were redone after the reunification. The streets were actually asphalt. In fact, they were asphalt when I lived there too, but in the early days, they were cobblestones. So after the reunification, they decided to redo the town like it was in the old days, so they ripped up all the asphalt and repaved it with cobblestones. Okay, then towards it was pretty quiet there for most of the war. It was remote, and there wasn't any industry or anything like that the Allies would be interested in. But a couple of months before the end of the war, the Allies found out that in Nordhausen, here's Stolberg, about 9 miles difference, they found out that they were assembling V2 rockets. Okay, most of you know what those are. They came out towards the last year or so of the war, and they were firing them at London. They just couldn't aim them very accurately, so they indiscriminately fell on whatever part of London they fell on. Well, the Allies found out that they were being assembled here, and so they organized an air raid. The United States had been in the war by this time. This was in early 1945, just a few months before the end of the war. And they had a lot of slave labor people that they got out of concentration camps. They made them work here and work in these V2 assembly plants. It wasn't exactly a camp, but it was pretty close. They were not treated very well, and they died by the hundreds. And then they would just replace them with more people from the concentration camps. So one day, my cousin and I, the Allies had already advanced to the Rhine and past the Rhine, and my mother had a cousin there, and her family, her husband and her one son left their home because the Allies were advancing there. And one day they showed up on our doorstep and they said, "Hey, can we live with you?" So, okay, we had one living room, one bedroom, and a tiny kitchen. There were already 4 of us there, so now there were 7. Got kind of snug. And my cousin and I one day decided, well, we're going to take a walk, and we walked out. We walked out in this direction along the road. Out further here, there was a swimming pool out in the forest, which people would go there a lot and on Sundays when the weather was nice in the summer, and there was a big grassy area they could have picnics. So we had gone out there, and then we were on the way back when the bombing in Nordhausen started, and it was easily heard in Stolberg, 9 miles away. And it was really intense bombing. You couldn't really tell the difference between the individual detonations. It was just kind of a continuous roar. And we weren't really all that scared. We were kind of like, oh boy, somebody's getting bombed. And then we arrived here. We were coming from this direction, coming through here, and a lady hollered at us out the window and said, "Don't you hear what's going on? What are you doing outside? You shouldn't be outside." So we said, "Oh, okay." And we retreated into this arch of this tower, and figured, well, we'll just wait here until the bombing stops. And after a few minutes, let's see, is this what I want? Yeah. We were over here in this tower, and after a few minutes, apparently one of the bombers that was bombing Nordhausen either got shot up, or maybe his bombs hung up temporarily. Anyway, he didn't get to drop his bombs on Nordhausen. And what was the custom then was that if you couldn't drop your bombs on your target, you didn't want to carry them all the way back to England, so you look for a target of opportunity. And the Nordhausen would be down in this direction about 9 miles. And so when they turned from their bombing run, you know, one of the paths would take them right over Stolberg. So this bomber came across like this, and he dropped his bombs on a run here. They didn't really aim very well. They just said, well, there's a target, drop the bombs. And one of them landed here, one landed right in the street, and the rest of them landed on this mountain. And, well, let's see how it's done with this. So we were over here, the bombs fell over here, and that's only a mile, or maybe a little over a mile. And that was loud. That was a lot louder than the bombs that fell in Nordhausen. And we stood there and we saw all the dust and smoke rising on the other end of town. And we said, oh boy, this is getting close. And then over here on this side of the road, there was a garage, a 4-stall garage, and we had a bunch of German soldiers that were stationed there, about a company size, and they were using this garage to maintain their vehicles. And so here's the tower, this was the garage, and then what we saw after those bombs fell on the other end of town, about 4 or 5 German soldiers came running out of here and started running up this mountain. And we said, well, they're soldiers, they must know what they're doing. So we took off after them, and we were faster than they actually, and we passed them on the way up. And I don't know if you can see, but faintly you can see a road, a dirt road that was kind of carved into the side of the mountain here. So we had passed them, so we got to the road and we stopped and looked down, and all of a sudden they stopped and ran back down the mountain, and we said, what the heck is going on? Well, they were soldiers and their ears were more attuned to what bombs sound like coming down out of the sky. And I was 11 at the time. My cousin, who was kind of sickly, he was older than me. I think he was about 14. And we said, you know, well, our ears were not attuned to such things. And it turned out there was a second bomber that needed to get rid of his bombs, and found this as a target of convenience. So his bombs, and I think they were, I don't know how many bombs a B-17 carried, about 8 or 10 was it? And they all fell in a fairly tight area up here, which was only about, this is about 200 yards. And that was really loud. That was beyond sound. And not just sound, but a powerful shock wave. And I guess I had pretty fast reactions, and I just jumped off the road and down the mountain and landed. And as I was flying through the air, there were rocks and dirt landing all over the place, and I heard something was sizzling by about 2 feet over on this side, which I think was a piece of shrapnel. And I landed there and looked up, and there was my cousin standing there, like the deer in the headlight thing. And I screamed at him. I said, "Take cover!" Except I screamed it in German. And so then he, oh, okay, and he went behind there was a big tree there with about a 2-foot thick trunk, and he hid behind there. Well, then after a few seconds it was all over, the last rock had fallen, and so I went back up on the road, and I went this way a little way to see if my house was still standing, and it was. So I said to my cousin, we're not going back to town, they're going to blow our town away. And what I didn't know, well, he had a hernia, and from the exercise, from the strain of running up this mountain, that had popped out, but he didn't say anything. And I said, oh, no, we're not going, and I started walking in this direction. And I hadn't gone more than about 10 or 20 feet. I heard this hissing sound, and my 11-year-old brain said, something's hissing, it's got to be a time bomb. And so I looked all over the place for a hole maybe this big where a bomb had gone into the ground and was going to blow us all to kingdom come here in any second. But then I saw there was a little puddle of water in the middle of the road, and there was some little steam rising from it, and I looked at it, and that's what the hissing was. It was a hot piece of shrapnel that had fallen into this little puddle of water and was hissing while it was cooling off. So I breathed a sigh of relief, but I still wasn't going to go back. We went, I don't know, maybe a few hundred, maybe up to 1,000 feet along this road. And then I heard an aircraft approaching very low. And I said, oh boy, you know, and there happened to be a tree trunk, a tree that had fallen over much earlier, pretty good-sized tree. So we crawled under the trunk of that tree, and it was a fighter plane, but I don't know whether it was American or German, whether it was a P-51 or a Messerschmitt, but it was flying really low and went over us. And then I figured, well, I could get killed out here. Besides, you know, I want my mommy. So we went back and went down and went home, and my mother breathed a huge sigh of relief when we showed up. And, but then later that day, I said, I'm going to go to the other end of town because I want to see what happened there. And I went there where the bomb had landed in the street. And there was one house that was totally gone. I mean, there was nothing left. The house next to it had 2 walls missing, and the second floor was kind of hanging down, and the furniture had slid off it into the street. And across the street, the 3 houses had, their fronts were gone. Their front wall was gone. So, yeah, but that was the only time we got bombed, or in fact, that any place near us got bombed. Later on, the day before, we knew that, I mean, we could see that the war was lost, but guys in Berlin still said, oh, we have these magic weapons that we're still going to win the war. But then we knew that the Americans were only about a day away, and the German company that was in our town, they were thinking about defending the town. And so the village elders went to the commander and said, hey, you know, just get out of here, will you? You're going to get us all killed. So they could see the sense in that, and that afternoon there was a fairly long convoy of vehicles, and they all left. And then the next morning, that night, all of a sudden we heard whistling. We had a very distant, faint boom. A few seconds later, we heard a whistle going over, and then we heard a louder boom, and we were getting shelled from, you know, some miles away. And that lasted for a few hours, but they didn't, I don't think they even meant to hit any significant part of the town. All the shells landed in a plant nursery at one end of town. A lot of craters there, but they didn't do any real damage in the town. And the next morning then, we saw 2 Americans come up the street. One was close to the buildings on that side, the other close to the buildings on this side, and they were, you know, this guy was looking at those windows to see if there was any guns pointing out, and the guy on this side was looking at these windows. So just the 2 of them first, then later on more of them came, and then they went from house to house and said, they had learned 2 German words. One was Soldat, which means soldier, and the other one was Gewehr, which means rifle. So they would come in the house and say, Soldat, Gewehr, and no. But then they found out my mother could speak German, so then there was about half a dozen of them all of a sudden in our house talking German to my mother. And sort of diagonally across the street there was a forest ranger, and he was dumb enough to have his uniform on. And when the Americans went in there, the guy with the uniform, he must be a soldier. So they were going to haul him off, and his wife or somebody knew that my mother could speak English, came over and said, come over and explain. So my mother went over there and said, no, he's not a soldier, he's a forest ranger. That's a forest ranger uniform. And well, they looked it over and they said, after a while they were satisfied, yeah, okay. And they left them be. So the Americans took the town, and they were there, I don't know, maybe somewhere between a month or 2 months long. And they were good, you know, they behaved decently. And but the Allies had already divided up Germany into the 4 different occupation zones: British, American, French, and Soviet. And we wound up in the Soviet sector. So one morning, the Americans moved out, and that afternoon the Russians moved in. And well, things went even further downhill after that. We didn't really have enough to eat, and I went to school barefoot even in the spring when there was still a little snow on the ground. But, you know, we survived, and one thing that my brother and I had learned, there were a number of little streams going through our town, and they had trout in them, mostly rainbow trout, and we had learned to catch them, which was illegal actually, but oh, thank you. I had told my kids that, and they said, "Oh, really? You caught them by hand, really?" And they weren't altogether sure that it was true. So, of course, I had to show them that I did, in fact, do that. So, oh, I wanted to show you, let me show you these videos first. I'm not going to show you the whole thing because that would take up too much time. Here's the tower.
And that's what I stood under when the bombs were falling. And it's wide enough for one car to get through, or even a truck. And here is where I was standing, right there.
Right there.
When the bombs fell in Stolberg. And when the first load fell, I ran over here because there were some German soldiers that came out of this garage over here. And I ran up the mountain over here. And then bombs fell on the mountain about 200 yards away from where I was standing. But fortunately, they all missed. And we're coming up here.
I don't know what that rumble is coming from.
Right there. There's no.
That's the school I went to.
And then just around the corner over there, down a little ways.
The name of the street was Rittergasse, which means Knight's Alley.
This is it, as you can see, house number 41. And there is also when it was built, 1676, so it's pretty old. We lived, those two windows were our living room, this window was our bedroom, and then we had a very small kitchen in the back. And this on the first floor.
Okay, that's enough. And then here's another video that shows, I'm going to just skip most of this. You can see that all the streets are now cobblestone. I'm going to skip down here.
Completely down, and then fell on the mountain on either side. But one of them fell right in the street.
Right about here.
And knocked this house completely down, and they never rebuilt it. That was 65 years ago. I guess they're just going to leave it the way it is.
That was in 2010 when we were there. Okay. Let's go to this one, which is my proof that I'm gonna skip most of this. The way we did this, we would feel very slowly under rocks or roots, and then when we felt something slippery, oh, that's a fish, and that's what I'm doing here. And okay, here's the proof. Let's see. Look at the bright coloring on that thing. Oh, let's see his head. Oh, no, let's bring him up. Oh, wow. That was my son who was taking the video, talking there. Okay. Then also when we went there in 2010, I had never gone the rest of the way up this mountain to look at the damage that the bombs did up here. But then in 2010, some of my family went up there with me, and this is my granddaughter and grandson, and we found this, which is one of the craters from that bombing. These trees were not knocked down by the bombs. They were, I mean, this is 65 years later. So these trees grew after the war was over and probably got knocked over by a windstorm or something like that. But yeah, that's one of the craters. And then after the Russians came in, we lived there for about a year. When we had missed a lot of school, several months worth of school. But then we went back to school, and then about a year later, oh, and we hadn't heard anything from my father for about a year. We assumed he was dead. But then a letter showed up from him, and he had been a prisoner of war. He had lost part of one leg, just under the knee, but he was alive. But they were married at that. When I was 3 years old, they actually got divorced, but then when I was about 10, they got remarried, and were married then at the end of the war. Well, my mother had decided before we got this letter, or she had wondered whether we could all go to America. And so the trains were running again, so we took a train to Berlin. And this was before the wall was built in Berlin, so you could go from the east part of Berlin to the west part. The train ride was kind of interesting. They had, steam locomotives in those days, but we didn't have any coal, so they were using wood to power the locomotive. And the wood, leaves a lot of sparks and embers and stuff like that. The train was very crowded, extremely crowded. My mother and sister did find space inside the car, but my brother and I were sitting on the coupling between two cars, and we watched all the sparks and fiery embers passing underneath us. So that was kind of an interesting train ride. Then we got to Berlin, and Berlin was all bombed out, and there again, my memory fails me, and I was 12 by this time, but I just cannot remember where we stayed in Berlin. I don't know, it's a miracle we even found a place. But then we went to the American sector of Berlin, to the American consulate, and my mother, told the consul what the situation was, and he said, well, you didn't become a citizen, and the girl was born in Germany, but the two boys were born in America, so they're citizens, so they could go back. Do you have anybody over there that would be willing to take them? Well, there was 2 sisters and a brother of my father that lived in the New York area, but we didn't have an address or telephone number. My mother just told the consul, well, they're somewhere in the New York area. We knew their names. So he said, well, why don't you come back in 2 days and we'll see what we can do. So we went back in 2 days and he said, yeah, we found them and they're willing to take the boys. So I don't know, I guess, I don't know, I suppose somehow they found them in the New York area. So that's how my brother and I was 13 by this time, my brother was 14. And we got a joint passport, one passport for the both of us. This is me, and that's my brother. My pen must have had better ink because mine is still there, and my brother's has faded out. And then they sent us by train through the Russian zone back to Bremen, where we lived to begin with. And we were there for 2 weeks in a building that was essentially a refugee shelter. And they kept us there until they had enough people to fill up a boat and put us on this ship, which was a troop carrier. Actually, it wasn't intended as a passenger ship, but it was a troop carrier, about 9,500 tons, so not all that big. And they had all the men and boys were on one deck in an open area with triple-decker bunks, and all the girls and women were on the deck above that with the same kind of arrangement. And it took 10 days. It was a fairly slow ship. It took 10 days to cross the Atlantic, landed in New York, and so we got off the ship and around noon, and we waited, and we waited. We said, well, they're going to come and pick us up, aren't they? And so then it was evening, it was getting dark, and my brother found somebody who could speak German, and said, we're supposed to get picked up here, but they're not coming. And we did have their names, so they looked in the phone book and called them up and said, hey, there's 2 boys here. Yes. And they said, what? You know, I guess nobody had informed them that we were coming or when we were coming. They just knew that sometime we were coming. So they came out. One family lived on Staten Island, the other on Long Island. The one on Staten Island came and picked us up and hauled us home. So then I lived with the one on Staten Island, and they had one son who was a year older than me. And my brother lived with the one on Staten Island.